The frozen arrival, the Arctic wind howled like a wounded animal as Thomas checked the weather instruments outside his research station. 20 years studying climate patterns in this frozen wasteland had taught him to respect the ice. But tonight something felt different. The aurora above danced with colors he had never seen before. Streaks of silver and blue that seemed almost alive. He was about to head inside when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in this wilderness. Soft, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Thomas grabbed his flashlight and followed the noise beyond the equipment shed. What he found made him question his sanity. Huddled against a snowdrift was a child. But no human child had skin that shade of pale blue, or eyes that reflected light like a cat's. She wore strange clothing that seemed too thin for the cold, and her small body shook with violent tremors. Behind her, half buried in snow, was something that looked like a metallic pod. Still smoking despite the freezing temperature, Thomas didn't hesitate. He scooped up the tiny form, feeling how cold she was even through his thick gloves, and rushed back to the station. Inside, he laid her on his cot near the heater and began stripping away the strange garments. Her skin was like touching marble, cold and smooth. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned and started checking for injuries. The child's eyes fluttered open. They were enormous and the color of deep ocean water. When she saw him, she made a sound that was part whimper, part something else entirely. Not quite words, but he understood the fear in them. "It's okay," he whispered, keeping his voice gentle. "You're safe now." Over the next few hours, Thomas watched in amazement as color slowly returned to her skin. The blue remained, but it became vibrant, alive. Her breathing steadied. When she finally sat up, she looked around the small station with wonder. Touching everything carefully, as if learning the world through her fingers, Thomas tried calling his supervisor. But the radio only produced static. The strange lights in the sky seemed to be interfering with communications. He told himself that by morning he would figure out what to do. But as he watched the child curl up under the blankets, her small hand clutching his sleeve as she drifted to sleep, something shifted in his chest. He had spent 2 decades alone in the ice, focused only on his work after his wife died. This child, whoever or whatever she was, had awakened something he thought frozen forever. The next morning brought new discoveries. The child could understand him, though she couldn't speak English yet. She pointed at herself and made a sound. "Nira," he repeated it, and she smiled. It was a beautiful smile that made her strange eyes sparkle. When she touched the frost on the window, it seemed to respond to her. Forming delicate patterns that no natural cold could create, Thomas knew he should report this. There were protocols for extraordinary discoveries. But when government agents finally arrived 3 days later, having traced the unusual atmospheric readings, Thomas found himself lying. He claimed he had seen a meteor strike, nothing more. As they searched the area, finding only the melted remnants of the pod, Thomas hid Nira in a supply cache. He told himself it was temporary, that he would turn her over once he understood more. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had already decided to protect her, no matter the cost. Weeks became months. Thomas taught Nira English, and she learned with stunning speed. She taught him words in her language, sounds his throat could barely form. She showed him how she could freeze water with a thought, create ice sculptures in the air. In return, he taught her about Earth, about humanity, about the strange and beautiful world she had fallen into. On the day she first called him father, speaking the word carefully in English, Thomas felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. He was 50 years old, alone at the edge of the world, and suddenly he had a daughter who fell from the stars. He kissed her forehead, feeling the coolness of her skin, and promised himself he would keep her safe from whatever forces had sent her here. That night, as Nira slept, Thomas stood at the window watching the aurora. Somewhere up there was her home, her people. Someday they might come looking. But until that day, she was his to protect, his to love. And he would face whatever came with the same determination that had kept him alive in this frozen wilderness for 2 decades. Growing. Bond's 15 years passed like water through fingers. Thomas had relocated them to a remote cabin in northern Canada. far from prying eyes and closer to civilization than the Arctic station. Nira had grown into a young woman of remarkable beauty. Her blue skin had deepened to the shade of twilight. Her abilities with ice and cold had become extraordinary. Thomas was 65 now, his hair completely silver, his face marked by time and weather. But Nira kept him young in spirit. She had developed a passion for human art and music. Spending hours painting the landscapes around their home or playing the piano, he had somehow hauled up the mountain. Her paintings captured both worlds, showing Earth through alien eyes. What Thomas hadn't anticipated was how his feelings would evolve. Nira was no longer the frightened child he had rescued. She was a woman with her own thoughts, dreams, and desires. And recently, the way she looked at him had changed. It was in the lingering touches when she helped him with difficult tasks. The concern in her eyes when his back ached from chopping wood. The way she positioned herself close to him when they sat by the fire. One evening, as snow fell gently outside, Nira was reading a human book about love. She looked up suddenly. "Thomas, do your people believe that love exists between different kinds of beings?" He felt his throat tighten.
Oh.
Some do. Others think love transcends such boundaries. What do you believe? Her eyes held his, and he saw something in them that made his heart race. "I believe," he said carefully, "that love finds us in unexpected places. That it doesn't ask permission or follow rules." She set down her book and moved to sit beside him. "I have been thinking much about this. About what I feel." Her hand found his, her cool fingers intertwining with his weathered ones. "You saved my life. You gave me a home, a purpose. But what I feel now is not gratitude, Nira," she started, but she pressed her fingers to his lips. "Let me speak. I am not a child anymore, Thomas. I see how you look at me when you think I do not notice. I feel the distance you try to maintain, but I do not want distance." She leaned closer, her breath cool against his face. "I want to know if you feel what I feel." Thomas closed his eyes, fighting a battle between his heart and his conscience. "You deserve someone young, someone from your own world." "My world cast me out," she said firmly. "You are my world. These mountains, this cabin, your stories by the fire. This is where I belong." When he opened his eyes, she was even closer. "I am an old man, Nira. You are the man who saved me. The man who taught me about beauty and kindness. The man I love." The kiss, when it came, was gentle. Her lips were cool, but soft, and Thomas felt years of loneliness melt away. When they parted, he saw tears freezing on her cheeks like tiny diamonds. He brushed them away tenderly. "We will face judgment for this," he whispered. "From my people, and possibly yours, then we will face it together." That night, they sat wrapped in blankets, her head on his shoulder, talking about the future. But the future arrived sooner than expected. 3 nights later, Nira woke Thomas with urgency in her voice. "They are coming." He followed her outside. The sky was alive with lights, but these were not auroras. Geometric patterns, massive structures breaking through the atmosphere. Ships. Nira stood transfixed, her hands trembling. "I remember now. The ritual. I was marked, prepared, sent away to prove my strength. They come when the exile is ready to return." Thomas felt ice in his stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What does that mean?" She turned to him, her face a mixture of fear and wonder. "It means my childhood is over. It means they have come to bring me home. You don't have to go. If I refuse, they will not leave. They will study Earth, perhaps claim it. I cannot risk your people for my happiness." Her voice broke. "I cannot risk you." Thomas pulled her close, feeling her cool body against his warmth. Above them, the ships grew larger, blotting out the stars. He had known this day would come. He had prepared himself for it, but nothing could have prepared him for the hollow ache of losing her. "Then I will come with you," he said. She pulled back, searching his face. "You would leave Earth? Leave everything? Everything I love is standing right here." The Return to Kethra delegation that descended from the ships was imposing. 7 beings, each taller than Thomas, with elaborate patterns etched into their blue skin and wings that seemed more ceremonial than functional. The leader, who introduced himself as Commander Vesion, regarded Thomas with barely concealed disdain before turning his attention to Nira. He spoke in their native tongue, a flowing series of sounds that rose and fell like song. Nira responded in kind, her voice carrying an authority Thomas had never heard before. The exchange grew heated, her gestures becoming more emphatic. Finally, she switched to English. "I will return with you, but Thomas comes with me." Vesion's expression hardened. Impossible. Humans are primitive. He would not survive the journey, let alone life among our people. "Then improve your transport," Nira said coldly, "or I stay here." The standoff lasted for 3 days. The ships remained in orbit while negotiations continued. Thomas learned that Nira had been exiled as part of an ancient tradition. Children born with unusual abilities were sent to harsh worlds to either perish or grow stronger. Those who survived would return to lead their people into new eras. What her people had not anticipated was that Nira would return changed by love, that she would refuse to abandon the human who had raised her, that she would demand he be granted full status in their society. On the 3rd night, Vesion agreed to her terms, but with a warning. He will face trials. Many will see him as a weakness, proof that you have been corrupted by a lesser species. "Let them try to prove it," Nira said, her eyes flashing. The day of departure, Thomas said goodbye to the cabin. He packed little, just a few photographs, and the first painting Nira had ever created. As they walked to the clearing where the transport waited, she took his hand. "Are you frightened?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted, "but more terrified of losing you." The transport ship was like stepping into a dream. Everything was smooth surfaces and soft light, designed for beings who experience temperature differently than humans. Thomas felt the cold immediately, but Nira was already adjusting environmental controls. A section of the ship became warmer, accommodated for his biology. As they lifted off, Thomas watched Earth shrink below them. He thought of all he was leaving behind, friends he had lost touch with, a career abandoned decades ago. But when Nira nestled against him, her cool presence a comfort. He knew he was making the right choice. The journey took weeks, though time felt strange at faster than light speeds. Nira spent hours teaching him about her people, their history, their complex social structures. The Cathora had been spacefarers for millennia, spreading across dozens of worlds. They valued strength, adaptability, and the mysterious quality they called ice heart, the ability to make difficult decisions without emotion clouding judgment. "Your people will think you weak for loving me," Thomas said one evening as they floated in zero gravity, her showing him the stars through the observation port. "Then I will show them that love is the greatest strength," she replied. "You gave me something my people never could. You gave me a home not built on tradition or expectation, but on choice and care." When they finally approached Kethra Prime, Thomas's breath caught. The planet was beautiful, covered in crystalline structures that caught the light of 3 suns and fractured it into endless colors. Cities floated in the upper atmosphere, tethered by technology he couldn't begin to understand. But as they descended toward the capital, Thomas saw the crowds gathered, thousands of blue-skinned beings all watching. He understood then that Nira's return was not just a personal journey. It was a political event. She was returning as a prophet, a leader, and she was bringing a human to their world. Nira squeezed his hand. "Whatever happens, remember, I chose you, and I would choose you again." Between 2 worlds, the reception hall of the Grand Council was carved from a single massive crystal. Light refracted through it, creating illusions of space and depth. Thomas stood beside Nira, acutely aware of thousands of eyes upon him. He wore clothing the Kethra had provided, but it did nothing to make him feel less alien. The Council of Elders sat in a semicircle, each ancient and imposing. The eldest, named Quera, spoke first. Her voice was like wind through ice caves. "Nira, daughter of Kethra, returned from exile. You bring shame upon us by carrying a human to our sacred world." Nira stepped forward, her posture regal. "I bring evolution. This human, Thomas, saved a child you left to die. He taught that child strength through compassion, resilience through love. Is this not the purpose of exile? To grow beyond what we were? The exile is meant to harden you, another elder said, to burn away weakness. Instead, you have formed an attachment. I have formed a partnership, Nira corrected. Thomas is not my weakness. He is my foundation. The debates continued for hours. Thomas understood little of the formal language, but Nira translated in whispers. Factions were forming. Some saw her return as prophecy fulfilled, others as corruption. The key issue was not just Thomas's presence, but what it represented: change, adaptation, the influence of another species on Kethra destiny. That night, in the quarters assigned to them, Thomas held Nira as she trembled not from cold, but from anger. They see you as a pet, she said, as if I brought home an animal from my travels. Perhaps I need to show them otherwise, Thomas said. The next day he requested to address the council. The elders were skeptical, but Nira's status as a returning exile gave her certain rights, including allowing her chosen companion to speak. Thomas stood before them, feeling every one of his 65 years. I am human, he began, in carefully practiced Kethra. I am old by my species standards. I am weak by yours. But I ask you this question. What is strength? He continued, speaking of the years in the Arctic, of survival against nature's cruelty, of raising a child, not his own species, adapting to her needs, learning her ways, of choosing love even when it defied logic. Your people exile children to make them strong. But true strength is not just survival. It is choosing to live with purpose. Nira taught me that, and I taught her that strength and gentleness are not opposites. The hall was silent when he finished. Then Quera spoke. You speak our language poorly, but your meaning is clear. Perhaps the exile has worked differently than intended, not hardening Nira alone, but creating a bond that strengthens both. It was not full acceptance, but it was a beginning. Over the following weeks, Thomas became a curiosity in Kethra society. Some visited him with genuine interest, wanting to understand humans and Earth. Others came to test him, to find flaws that would prove Nira's judgment compromised. Through it all, Nira remained his anchor. In private moments, they found peace together. She would create ice sculptures while he sketched art from two worlds mingling. They would talk late into the night about the future, about what they might build together. One evening, as three suns set simultaneously painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Nira took Thomas to a private garden. Crystal flowers grew there, responding to touch by chiming like bells. This place is sacred, she said. Reserved for bonding ceremonies. Thomas understood. Your people will never fully accept it. Some will, others will not. But my choice is made. She produced a small blade, the same one she had brought from Earth. In our tradition, bonding requires blood. But our blood is different. Then we will create our own tradition, Thomas said. They each made a small cut. Where their blood mixed on the crystal floor, something extraordinary happened. The crystal began to glow, patterns spreading outward. Red mixing with blue to create purple fractals that extended throughout the entire garden. It was unprecedented. The crystal had never reacted to any bonding this way. When news spread of the crystal's response, opinions began to shift. Even among the Cathora, who valued tradition, there was respect for signs and portents. The crystal gardens had stood for millennia. They did not change, except for this. Perhaps some whispered the union of Kethra and human was not corruption, but destiny. The new dawn 6 months after their arrival on Kethra Prime, crisis struck. Earth signals were being monitored by the Cathera fleet, and a militant faction had interpreted human weapons tests as preparation for hostility. They demanded preemptive action to pacify the primitive world. Thomas sat in on the emergency council session, his presence now reluctantly accepted. He listened as commanders debated strategy, speaking of Earth as if it were an obstacle rather than his home. Nira rose, her voice cutting through the debate. You speak of my human's world as if it holds no value. But I lived there for 15 years. I know its people. They are diverse, chaotic, flawed. They are also resilient, creative, and capable of great compassion. They are not so different from us. Vesian, the commander who had first retrieved her, spoke. They are different in the only way that matters. They are weak. First contact should be from a position of strength. Then let me be that strength, Nira said. Name me envoy. Let me return to Earth with Thomas and establish true contact, not conquest. The debate raged for hours, but eventually Quera supported Nira's proposal. She would lead a diplomatic mission, becoming the bridge between two species. Thomas would serve as human ambassador, the first of his kind to speak for Earth among the stars. The journey back to Earth felt different. Thomas was returning changed, carrying knowledge and perspective that would alter humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Nira prepared meticulously, learning everything she could about human cultures, languages, and diplomatic protocols. When they entered Earth's solar system, every telescope and sensor was trained on their approach. The Cathera had announced their arrival, giving humanity time to prepare. Landing was chosen to be neutral territory, the Arctic station where their story began. Standing on the ice again, Thomas felt the circle closing. Here he had found a freezing child. Now he returned with a woman who commanded starships, who carried the hopes of two species. But when he looked at her, he still saw the girl who had learned to smile, who had painted sunsets and played piano. World leaders arrived by helicopter and transport plane. Media covered every moment. And Nira, magnificent in her formal robes but still carrying herself with the grace Thomas remembered, addressed humanity. She spoke of the Kethra, of their long history among the stars. She spoke of exile and return, of finding love in unexpected places. And she spoke of the future. A future where Earth would join the galactic community, not as subjects, but as partners. My people sent me here to become strong, she said, her voice carrying across the frozen plain. But I learned that strength alone is hollow. This man, Thomas, taught me that strength is meaningless without compassion, that survival is empty without purpose. Earth taught me these lessons. Now, I would teach them to my people. The negotiations took months, but Thomas watched as barriers fell. Cultural exchanges began. Technology was shared, carefully and gradually. The Cathara learned from human art, music, and philosophy. Humans gained access to medical advances, clean energy, as the stars themselves. A year later, Thomas and Nira stood on a new world, the first joint colony. Humans and Cathara working side by side, building something unprecedented. The planet was green and blue, remarkably Earth-like, but with its own unique beauty. Thomas was 70 now, his body finally showing the strain of all he had endured. But Nira remained timeless, her blue skin unlined. She would outlive him by centuries, he knew. It was a truth they had both accepted. Do you regret it? He asked as they watched the twin suns set. The years you will spend after I am gone? She took his hand, her cool fingers wrapping around his. I regret nothing. You gave me life twice. Once when you pulled me from the snow, and once when you taught me that living means more than surviving. Human children played with young Cathora in the settlement below, learning each other's games, creating new ones. Two species, so different, finding common ground. And at the center of it all was the story of an old man who had saved a child, and the woman who had brought him to the stars. Thomas knew he would not see how this story ended, but he had seen enough. He had seen love transcend species. He had seen fear become understanding. He had seen the impossible become real. As darkness fell, the colony lights glowed warm against the alien landscape, and Thomas understood that this was the true meaning of his life. Not the research abandoned or the years alone in the ice, but this, being brave enough to love what was different, to protect what was vulnerable. To believe that the frozen child in the snow could become the bridge between worlds.